Ready? Good afternoon. I want to apologize for not being here this morning, but we had guests from England and I think 4 chiefs from the Cherokee and Muskogee Indians. Is that the one down near Savannah? Huh? Okay, Columbus. Is that the Muskogees? Okay. We had 2 chiefs from there, and since the capital of the Cherokee Nation is in my district, felt like maybe I ought to say hello. So y'all I'm sure y'all really regretted having to come here at 9 o'clock. So, but we're going to do 1 o'clock or thereabouts. Y'all bow with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, here we are again, asking you to forgive us, to say thank you for the many wonderful blessings, to ask that you be with us, not only here, but in our personal lives. Lead, guide, direct us. Give us strength. I ask these things in my Savior's name. Amen. Mr. Battles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm here for under structured rules on the back side, House Bill 202, and it is just the revision of the tax revenue and taxation as it relates to ad valorem and the appeal process.
Mr. Battles was here yesterday. Is there any questions for him? Thank you, Mr. Battles.
Thank you.
Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am asking for House Bill 18. That's in the middle of your page, front, under modified structure, the first one. That bill exempts aerospace engineer licensure here in the state of Georgia. We are mirroring the statute in the state of Florida. This would make us very competitive to lure in the space industry and to bring in skilled workforce. That's essentially what the bill does.
Do we have questions? I hate to tell you, I hadn't got a clue what the bill really does.
It exempts licensure for aerospace engineers.
I picked up on that.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Well, yes, sir. I'll be glad to. Right now, the state of Florida is the only state in the country that exempts aerospace engineers. And the purpose for that is the FAA and the Department of Defense essentially regulate aerospace engineers. They have total purview of credentialing this process. And so there hasn't been a testing of aerospace engineers in this state for 15 years. We just don't test in the state for that. Georgia law still requires that we test and that we actually license aerospace engineers. But because there is no regulatory function or a test that they actually take at this point, it's kind of a useless law at this point. It's a catch-22. So the state of Florida has recognized that, and they have removed that requirement in the state of Florida. So in order for us to be competitive with the state of Florida in luring in aerospace engineers and industry, I think we should do this move, and that's exactly what I've done with this bill.
Mr. Stevens.
Isn't it true that we're looking for a spaceport in Georgia?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, not yet.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm bringing to you HB 73, which is the third one below modified structure rule. This is the bill that would allow for the creation of a durational residency requirement for our local officials and our local elections.
Tell them why we need this bill.
Yes, sir. Today, many people believe that your county commissioner, if you're broken up into posts or districts within your county, would have to live within that county post or district for up to 1 year in order to run from that district, and that's simply not the case. OCGA does not allow for a durational residency requirement, so you could potentially have a candidate who lives within the county move into a different district the day before qualifying, establish residency, and run from that post. We're seeking to correct that.
Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, is it not true that I signed this bill because in Cherokee County, which I used to represent, that we've had on recent occasions people that game the system, move at the last minute, and there's no legal challenge when they do that?
That's correct, sir, because the local legislation as it's written currently is in conflict with the OCGA, and OCGA takes precedent. This bill would enable that local legislation. It does not mandate that local governments establish this durational residency requirement. It would simply enable it.
Mr. Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Turner, this bill would place a requirement for somebody to have 12 months residency within the district that they're running in, correct?
Through local legislation. It would enable local legislation so that if a local delegation, such as the Cherokee delegation, decided that our county commissioners should live within their post for up to 1 year, that we could require that through local legislation.
And I think what you're saying is they can't do that through local legislation now.
Correct. Any local legislation that is on the books today is unenforceable.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Wilkerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Today I come to ask for House Bill 177, which is the third one down on modified open rule. This is the defects reporting bill that we passed out last year under House Bill 914, and it closes the reporting loop by requiring that defects give certain reports back to our school counselors. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you're up there, Mr. Tanner, when he opens that door, shut up. I can't hear anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here for HB 63, which is on the back page under structure rules, second one down. This is the Georgia Employer GED Tax Credit Bill. It would just allow for employers to receive tax credits by assisting employees in receiving their GED by paying for the cost of the test and also paying for the cost of classes in order to prepare for the test.
What kind of cost is that?
What kind of cost, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
The cost to take the test, the first is
No,
$100.
I know that. What does it cost the state?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Mr. Chairman.
I know it. I tell you what, just Mr. Doorkeeper, just keep it shut while they're talking. We'll let them in after they're through. No, I know what the cost is, the 400 and the 1,200 credit. How much does that credit amount to?
To the state?
Yeah.
It's an aggregate of $2 million, which is in current law, Mr. Chairman. So we did not change that. We did not change the tax credit. It's already in current law.
And that's the reason we don't have to have a fiscal note?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Powell.
Representative Tanner, isn't it true that we already have a $2 million tax credit for a jobs or for a GED, just like what you've got here, except that it's not being used now because it's too much of a cumbersome procedure?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And so what you're doing is making this a usable credit that will actually result in people getting GEDs?
Yes, sir. We hope around 1,200 more a year.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is on the back page, Structure Rule, first bill, House Bill 49. This is a bill that would allow taxing jurisdictions to choose to issue a property tax bill electronically, and if they chose to do so, it would give the option to the taxpayer to receive it that way. It's a cost-saving measure for billing jurisdictions.
Any questions of Mr. Harrell? You got others?
I do, but it was suggested it might be a little early in the day for alcohol bills. But if you...
I don't think it's early at 9, so I don't know what we're doing here.
Well, on the first page then, sir, I appreciate it under modified structure. It's House Bill 85. And although the caption there might lead you to believe otherwise, this bill removes a prohibition for alcohol on property that is in the process of being surplus from state property to private development, primarily part of the acreage that was formerly Central State Hospital, so that could be redeveloped for perhaps grocery stores, restaurants, or what have you. The second bill also, under modified structure, House Bill 261, deals with those jurisdictions that have already approved Sunday sales by referendum, but it could be a county or a city that operated a public airport, clearly in this instance, Atlanta, Hartsville, Jackson. It would allow the local governing authority to make a decision that within the secure area of that airport, so only ticketed passengers that have been through security, could change the hours of sales in the restaurants within that secure part of the airport for service on Sundays. Could be as early as 5 a.m. And again, at Hartsville Jackson, primarily, we're dealing with a lot of international passengers that may be arriving in Atlanta, which seems like very early to us, but on their time could be dinner time. Those
Mr.
are
Roberts.
the two bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to your previous bill, HB 85.
Yes, sir.
So in other words, all you're doing is adding in the operated for use of care of disabled war veterans?
No, sir, that's protecting that language that's currently in the code. What we're doing is we're removing the prohibition from certain properties that were part of Central State Hospital and allowing for the local development authority and others to redevelop that property. But for the War Veterans Memorial, the prohibition remains.
I may have a friendly amendment for this.
Yes, sir.
That affects an area down in my area of the state as well. Can I get with you on it?
Absolutely, and I'd be happy to, and look forward to your motion with the chairman for the calendar.
Thank you.
No more questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. HB 320, next to the bottom on the first page under modified structure, the bill that gives a couple of tools to the Georgia Student Finance Commission and their related entities. First thing it does, Mr. Chairman, it gives them the ability to redact personally identifiable information in the event that they get freedom of information request. Those protections already exist for elementary through post-secondary, but through a federal law, but did not definitively extend to the GSFC since it's a state entity. The second thing it does is it gives some tools to the GSFC for recovery through non-judicial means for monies that are owed to them. Those means would be such as garnishment, income tax refund offsets, lottery winnings, and so forth.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did I do that right, Petrie?
Sir? Yes, sir, that was correct. Petrie. Thank you, sir. I'm here to speak to you all today about House Bill 340 under modified structured rule. And this is a real simple bill which basically just clears up a bill that was passed last year regarding the ability for us to have Sunday sales on either side of St. Patrick's Day. Last year's bill specifically mentioned March 16th through March 18th. And here again, a year later, that actually would not work because St. Patrick's Day falls such that this would not allow for our local celebration on Sunday. And so the new language simply states that the holiday period means an annual period of consecutive calendar days not exceeding 4 days, which shall include March 17th as part of such period.
Mr. Stevens.
And this is available everywhere, by the way. This pertains to all counties. Although this was signed by our delegation, it pertains to all counties.
Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, I might add, this was a flawed Senate bill that we passed last year. We're going to do it right this year.
Mr. Petrie, this is your first time here, right?
It is my first time here, Mr. Chairman.
Well, one, I hadn't run into a simple bill yet.
Thank you, sir. I stand corrected, sir. Sorry.
And two, you must be the new guy, because every time a new guy comes, we get a new Savannah St. Patrick's Day bill.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And I happen to be a Southern Baptist too, so you see what the delegation did to me, Mr. Chairman.
Jan, get me out of this.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, Representative, I just want to clarify, this bill, although it would be helpful, in your opinion, for Savannah, would apply to all counties. They would have this same opportunity if your bill is passed.
Yes, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. This bill, as it was passed last year, pertains to all counties or municipalities in which Sunday sales have been approved. Yes, ma'am.
Am I to be of the understanding that if we pass this one, there ain't no more days that St. Patrick's Day can fall on that we're going to mess up, is there?
Just Wednesday, Mr. Chairman. If St. Patrick's were to fall on a Wednesday, we wouldn't have Sunday sales. That'd be the only day of the week.
What's wrong? I tell you what, dude. Take your bill and y'all put it out there that all these communities that do that, they get one free Sunday. And I don't care which one it is.
And not everybody celebrates St. Patrick's Day. May have another day. No.
Mr. Petrie, I'm not trying to be facetious with you. Do you think we could work on it just a tad?
Yes, sir. I'm glad to do so.
In that case, I want to send it back to committee and y'all work on it and just get me one we can just do and be done with.
Will do, sir.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Rules Committee. Just wanted to come and ask for House Bill 126, that is the making GPS devices being able to be mounted on your windshields legal. Be glad to answer any questions.
Anybody got questions on radar detectors on your dashboard? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if I'm gonna claim that that's a GPS device. Okay. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the modified open rule, I have House Bill 298. This, a few years back, we adopted a code section that enables private process servers to be certified by the state to serve statewide. In that provision, there was in that section of the code, there was a sunset provision that actually ends this year. This is a good private enterprise bill. The bill simply repeals the sunset provision.
Mr. Ramsey.
How many approved private process servers are there now?
Chairman Willard may be able to answer that question.
380 across the state. Thank you.
Ms. Hughley? You can ask him what.
But I do appreciate first graders in Columbus.
Any other questions? Wait, I do. Is this going to take all day? Okay. Mr. Rogers.
Me?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why do you want to repeal a sunset provision, Chairman Jacobs?
Well, first of all, as a matter of practice, individual courts can allow private process servers anyway. That what we came up with this code section was something that standardized how they're trained. The sunset provision was put in there as an accommodation for the sheriffs, but I will say that there is already a provision in the bill that allows any individual sheriff to say that in my county there will be no private process servers. So I don't really see what the point of the sunset provision is.
Further question, Mr. Chairman? Yes. How long have we had a sunset provision in this particular part of the code section?
Since it was adopted, and it was adopted just a few years back. 5 years ago.
5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the reason, again, is why?
Because the sheriffs wanted a sunset provision in the bill.
So they support this bill now?
I'm not going to say that they support the bill. I believe that they don't.
They do not?
I believe that they do not.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But I do want to underscore that you can presently have private process servers allowed by individual courts. This creates, the code section actually creates standardized training for them, and I think that's actually a beneficial thing.
Chairman Jacobs, this might be a better question for Chairman Willard. How many sheriffs are allowing private process servers in their counties?
I think the last 2 counties, sheriffs authorized it. A number of courts have authorized it, with the sheriffs acquiescing to the right of the courts. And I might say the sunset provision, as I was part of the author of that bill, was in there as a way, not just sheriffs, but to see the program implemented, see how it was working, and if it was serving a good public purpose. And we think it is serving a public purpose, because the people who are doing private process server now are required to go through an educational course, training, testing, and then become certified, know that they're qualified and capable of doing that. As you are a lawyer, many times in my past, I've had problems about process servers done by most of the sheriff's office, mind you, but it's important that they have knowledge of how this job is to be performed.
Thank you.
With or without this bill, you are going to have private process servers anyway.
You want them trained.
Thank you. Have you got anything else you want to talk to us about?
I'll put in a plug for House Bill 215, and that's all I have to say about that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Ms. Hughley? Ms. Hughley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You in your first grade class are on.
Yeah. On behalf of all the first graders in Reese Road, I bring House Bill 70. They discovered that the state does not have an official state mammal, and they would like to designate one. They recommended the gray fox, but after consultation with the Commissioner of DNR, they like to have the white-tailed deer as the official state mammal.
So I can strike through gray fox and put
White-tailed deer.
That's my mammal. Okay, I've lost it. Let's go. Okay. Mr. Willard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm asking for House Bill 59, which I addressed yesterday before the committee. It is a bill that will put back in place that what we had prior to a court decision last February, which removed the ability of the citizen of the state to have the right to address before the court an unlawful or unconstitutional action by a state agency and seek relief either through declaratory judgment or injunctive relief.
Anybody got questions? Mr. Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 154. This just brings parity between the magistrate courts and the probate courts to issue a fine for contempt of court. And it just brings it to $500 apiece.
Mr. Earhart.
Mr. Chairman, just a question for Mr. Weldon. Going from 200 to 500, are the magistrate courts experiencing this massive amount of contempt-based activity in their courts that we need to fine folks and give that? The contempt citation is an interesting concept, and that came out of judiciary.
Well, I think what it does is it just gives the magistrate courts a little bit more authority. It gives them, they're presently at $200 is the fine they can issue, and moving up to $500, which is the same amount that probate court, which in the small counties deals with the traffic citations, wills and trusts and things like that. It just gives them, it just updates it, brings it to into parity with the probate court, and it in the magistrate courts, particularly in a lot of small counties, they handle a lot of misdemeanor issues and things like good behavior warrants type stuff. And this would give them a little more of a stick to require compliance.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
just as a statement, probate courts folks aren't generally, as he said, good behavior. There's a lot of things in magistrate court people feel a little bit significant about. I just don't know that it might not be a small thing if you got a $500 fine for yourself in one of those courts.
Well, clearly I wouldn't want a $500 fine, but I'm going to try to comport myself in accordance with decorum and compliance with any lawful order.
Well, you're a lawyer, you have to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does anybody else want to beat this one? Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to put my name next to Representative Spencer's HB 18 dealing with aerospace engineers. Our current law just is just another impediment in us getting a meaningful aerospace industry, and wanted to speak kindly of that bill. Also wanted to ask the chair's indulgence. I've been called and texted twice by a chairman across the street. I've got a bill to present in committee. Would the chair indulge me to? Thank you.
Mr. Stevens.
And beside House Bill 18 as well.
Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under modified structure, I've got a couple of election bills, 121, which is Secretary of State's bill, and 194, which is the early voting bill.
Ms. Abrams.
Just want to ask for HB 177 to our children, and 215 because it helps DeKalb County and gets us out of your way for at least a couple of days.
let's go back to 215. I think Mr. Jacobs said he was just going to mention it in passing. Since nobody really heard an explanation, and I don't know that I've got the whole afternoon to hear that one. But I did note that you're down by 215.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. J. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by HB 73 under modified structure, and also HB 63 and HB 202 under structured.
Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Chairman, I have a simple little housekeeping bill. This is known as the Lobbyist Employment Act of 2015. That you all should have on your desk. I'm not asking that we move this out today. This is something that we are going to continue to have some discussions on. I believe that we need to, I've had a lot of people come to me with questions today because we changed the bill yesterday, so I'm asking that we hold it over to next week. But I'd be glad to go through it now if you'd like for me to. I know that there are some amendments that people want to try to offer, so I'm at your indulgence as to what you would rather me do.
Mr. Roberts, I'm going to give you the discretion to do whatever you want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I'll go through it briefly and just kind of give you a 30,000-foot summary of where we're at with this piece of legislation. What we're basically doing is, one, we're repealing the tax credit on alternative fuel vehicles within this legislation. We're defining in here transportation purposes. We're also defining educational transportation purposes. We are going to leave eSPLOST and SPLOST alone because they each mirror each other within the Constitution. So whatever you do to one, you have to do to the other. So we're going to leave them alone until such time as they expire. Once they expire, if the voters choose to reauthorize them, then the money collected on motor fuel will be spent for transportation purposes, and that's why that definition is in here. From the SPLOST standpoint, from the eSPLOST standpoint, you will see a definition in here for educational purposes. Then we're going to also, under your lost, your host, most, all those, we're actually going to no longer allow you to charge that on motor fuel, but we're going to take it from 1% to 1.25% to allow them to recuperate part of the money that they will be losing off of the motor fuel standpoint. Most of you know lost, e-lost, and all is for property tax rollback relief. We're going to a straight excise tax as we move forward in the bill. We will no longer have a excise, a third or 3%, and then an additional 1% that is sales tax is figured on the average price of a gallon of gas every 6 months. So we're going to a straight excise tax. That rate is set at 29.2 cents per gallon, which is based off of a 4-year average price of a gallon of gas. We're also going to index it within this bill moving forward. We're indexing according to CAFE standards and to construction price index. On the back, we're talking about recapitalizing, putting more money into Georgia Transportation Infrastructure Bank, and just encouraging that they look at all areas of the state when we talk about Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties for grants and loans for financial assistance. Mr. Chairman, that is a very quick, brief 30,000-foot level at this little simple piece of legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to bring before the committee their consideration for House Bill 246. That is on the under modified open rule. This is cleanup from the last year, the CPA bill that moved it from the Secretary of State's office up under the department or state accounting office. This bill does three things. It ratifies an executive order by which there was an independence issue when the state accounting officer was deemed to have control over the state auditor. That was against our standards. So the governor has, by executive order, made it an independent agency up under the state accounting office that takes care of the independence issue. Clean up as far as some administrative and enforcement authorities that were under Title 43 that the AG's office said were omitted in last year's bill, and then we're updating some of the definitions to make sure that we're in compliance with the Uniform Accountancy Act.
Any questions concerning that bill? All right, Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to put my name next to House Bill 177 to help our teachers on the ground better protect our children.
Anyone else? Mr. Benton, do you have anyone that you want to speak to on this list? Do you have any bill on this list that you would like to speak for? Everybody else has had the opportunity. All right. This is setting for tomorrow, Friday, under structured HB 202. Any opposition? It's on. Under structured HB 63. Any opposition? It's on. Under structured HB 49. Any opposition? Under modified structure, HB 320. Opposition. Under modified structure, HB 73. Any opposition? Under modified open, HB 298. Any opposition? Under modified open, HB 246. Any opposition? Tomorrow's Friday, right? Let's do raccoons. Modified open, HB 160. We're going to limit debate on that one to 30 minutes. The first 20 by the author. So you got 10. Hey, I'll put on 3 more. Y'all keep it up. That's it.